It was a weekend afternoon, and pale sunlight streamed through the dust-covered windows of Master Lin's dojo. In the far corner of the room, seated quietly among a long line of plastic chairs, was a black woman, still as a shadow. No one noticed her, and she didn't need them to. Amira Cole, 40 years old, her curly hair tied neatly at the nape of her neck, wearing a faded hoodie and worn-out sneakers, sat in silence, appearing no different from a regular mom waiting for her child to finish class. But behind those calm eyes, a storm was quietly being restrained. On the practice mat in the center of the room, a black boy around 14 shouted in sync with the group, his feet pivoting smoothly, his face dripping with sweat. Jaden Amira's only son was trying with everything he had, not just to master his kicks, but to be treated like every other student. But reality was far from that hope. Coach Darren White, black belt with eyes cold and sharp, glanced at Jaden like he was more of a nuisance than someone worth training. Too low. What is this, a hip-hop dance class? Chuckles erupted from the back row of students. No one defended him. No one thought it was wrong. Amira's hand clenched slightly. That familiar feeling again. The feeling of being judged for skin, not skill. She had tasted that thousands of times inside the cage of the MMA arena, under the harsh lights of televised matches in the silent judgment of the public. That was why she walked away from it all. That was why she had stayed silent for 10 years. Because she wanted Jaden to grow up in peace without being called the names people once hurled at her. But this afternoon, when Jaden's gaze dropped to the floor, when his shoulders shrank at the sound of scolding from a man called Master, something inside Amira cracked. She looked through the glass wall where people were busy cheering and clapping for a white student who had just made a mistake, but still received praise. And Jaden, he was punished, made to stand silently in a corner. No one noticed that the woman sitting quietly in the shadowed corner. Once there was a storm they used to call the Black Phoenix, and today that storm was waking up bit by bit within the deadly silence of a mother. The class ended just before 6 p.m. The noisy students rushed to gather their belongings, sneakers tapping chaotically across the mats, laughter bubbling through the room like steam. But Jaden stayed silent. He slowly stuffed his gloves into his backpack, eyes fixed on the floor, avoiding the mocking gazes from the kids behind him. "Hey, Chocolate Bruce Lee, don't forget to bring extra cotton tomorrow. Wouldn't want you getting another nosebleed from missing a kick." Laughter spread like poison in the air. Jaden didn't react. He zipped up his backpack and walked toward his mother. Amira stood hiding the darkness gathering in her eyes beneath the brim of her cap. "Hey, Mum," Jaden said, his lips forcing a faint smile. "You all right, sweetheart?" she asked, her voice lighter than a breeze. Jaden nodded quickly, as if afraid she might look too deep. "Yeah. We were practicing high kicks today. Just tired, that's all. Did anyone give you a hard time?" "No, Mum." He shook his head too fast, too certain. Something was off. Amira said nothing. She didn't press. She knew that particular silence well, the silence of a child in pain who believes they're not allowed to show it. She had been that child, throughout her youth. When they got home, Jaden rushed into the bathroom. The door slammed. The sound of water roared behind it. Amira knew. He wasn't washing away sweat. She stepped into his room after the water stopped. On the floor lay his crumpled gi, still damp, still warm. She picked it up and froze. A dried streak of blood had spread along the collar. Inside the lining was torn open. Her hands trembled as she opened his backpack. Inside, Jaden's wrist wrap was shredded alongside a crumpled note. "Want that belt? Mop the floors first, you damn monkey." No name, none needed. The message was loud enough. Amira sank to the floor, silent. The darkness inside her, long buried beneath layers of dust and years, was rising again, slowly, steadily. Jaden stepped out of the bathroom water, still dripping from his hair. "Wow, you took your time in there," Amira said, holding the GI behind her back. Jaden gave a faint laugh. Yeah, I was sweaty. She didn't blame him, didn't push him. She just asked gently, Jaden, do you think that dojo is fair? He hesitated. It's okay, Mom. It's just Coach Darren's a little strict, and some kids don't like me. Why do you think that is? He didn't answer. His eyes drifted away. A heavy silence filled the small room. Then Jaden spoke so quietly it was almost a whisper. Mom, no one there looks like me. They say, since I'm black, I'm probably not as flexible as they are. A few days ago, I got kicked in the face. It hurt. But Coach just said, don't be such a drama queen like the girls. Jaden lowered his gaze. Amira pulled her son into her arms, holding him tightly. She could feel his heartbeat racing, as if that small heart was trying to hide everything it could never say. She placed a hand on his wet curls and whispered, I'm sorry, baby. I thought that if I stayed silent, you'd be safe. Jaden didn't respond, but his arms wrapped around her waist and held on. That silence. It was heavier than any cry. That night, after Jaden had fallen asleep, Amira sat alone in the living room. The crumpled GI lay before her. She stared at every burst seam, every stain that wouldn't wash out. Every word of hatred was scribbled in ink. Then her eyes fell on an old picture frame, the one with her and her brother Marcus standing in the ring, their smiles radiant fists, raised with a championship belt between them. But the night Marcus died, she had let it all go martial arts fame herself, just to become an ordinary mother. But now, that ordinary was hurting her son, and she understood. Not every fight can be avoided. Some battles, if you don't step in, it will take down the ones you love first. Amira stood. She walked to the wooden cabinet and opened a drawer that had remained locked for over 10 years. Inside, the silver-trimmed black belt was still intact. Next to it, an old letter Marcus once wrote, You are Black Phoenix. Don't ever forget that, and don't let anyone snuff out that fire, not for any reason. She closed her eyes. That fire, it was burning again. The next morning, Amira took Jaden to the dojo as usual, but this time she didn't drive away. Instead, she padded to the front desk, where a young receptionist was glued to her phone. Hi? Amira smiled softly. I left my wallet here the other day. Can I check the hallway camera footage I need to review the night before last? The young woman hesitated for a moment, then nodded. Sure. Let me rewind it. Amira stood beside her, eyes fixed on the screen. But she wasn't looking for a wallet. She was looking for the truth. The footage appeared. That day, Jaden was getting ready for class. He had just taken off his shoes, smiling brightly when a white student walked up. Then Jaden suddenly kicked his backpack across the floor. Jaden stepped back, forcing a nervous grin. He didn't fight back. But then, 3 more boys showed up. They laughed loudly, circled him, mocked his voice, and then one smacked him hard on the back of the head. Know your place, trash. The camera had no sound, but Jaden's face said everything. Amira gripped the edge of the desk. Her breath tightened in her chest. It was like watching herself at 15, back on an MMA mat soaked in contempt. She kept watching. Another angle appeared, footage she should never have seen. Jaden was practicing kicks. Coach Darren walked up, stood in the middle of the class and pointed directly at him. You're the only one here who hasn't been considered for a belt. You know why? Because your skin doesn't match green. Laughter exploded. Then, deadly silence. No one objected. Not one person. Amira felt her heart shatter. Not just because her son was humiliated, but because she had let it happen for too long. She stood up, thanked the girl politely, and walked out as if nothing had happened. But inside her a decision had already been made. I will not let this boy grow up believing he is less. Not for another single day. That afternoon, after Jaden finished class, Amira asked him to sit down. Jaden, I need to ask you honestly. Have the kids been bullying you these past few weeks? He froze, said nothing. Amira took out her phone, played the clip from the camera. She didn't need much, just the first 20 seconds. Jaden lowered his head. Mom, I didn't want to make you sad. I just wanted to learn martial arts, so I could be strong. Baby being strong doesn't mean enduring injustice. You're not wrong. The person who made you believe you had to stay silent to be accepted, that's who's wrong. Jaden looked up, eyes red. Mom, what are you going to do? Amira gently squeezed his hand. This time, I will stand up, not just as your mother, but as the woman the world forgot, Black Phoenix. That night, Amira stepped into the storage room, a place unopened for over a decade. She flicked the light switch. A soft yellow light spilled onto the dusty wooden floors. In the corner, an old wooden chest. Inside, her MMA training armor, blood-red gloves, and her world championship belt still gleaming beneath the dust. She ran her fingers across the belt. In that moment, she was no longer the single mother hiding from the world. She was a warrior, a woman who once silenced arenas simply by stepping into the ring. But this time she wasn't fighting for glory. She was fighting to protect a child no one had protected, and to show every smirking face out there that even silence can shake the world. Saturday afternoon, Master Lin's dojo was more crowded than usual. Parents sat in long rows along the mirrored wall, chatting casually as they watched their children practice. The rhythmic shouts, the thudding of feet on mats, it all blended into a kind of music, rehearsed from memory. In the far corner, Amira appeared. Gone was the faded hoodie. Gone was the face that used to hide in shadow. She wore a fitted black tracksuit, her curly hair neatly tied at the back of her neck. Her deep black eyes no longer carried weariness, only the stillness of someone who had come to terms with exactly who she was. Jaden spotted his mother and froze for a second. In his eyes, surprise, then a flicker of fear. But then their eyes met. Amira gave a slight nod, said nothing. Jaden lowered his head, bit his lip, and stepped back into formation. On the other side of the mat, Coach Darren entered. His gaze brushed past Amira without stopping. He was used to not seeing people like her, used to believing they would never dare stand up. Today, we'll test a few students with a new drill, he announced, his voice cold. Anyone who fails won't be considered for belt testing this month. Jaden stood at the back of the line. He looked at his mother. She gave no signal. Just watched. Halfway through the session, Darren suddenly raised his hand. I'd like to do a little demonstration, he said, to show everyone the difference between technique and illusion. He walked toward the parents, then without warning pointed at Amira. You there, I've seen you watching classes often. I think it's time you stepped onto the mat. Let your son see martial arts isn't child's play. The room went dead silent. Jaden jumped up. Mom, don't. He's just... Amira raised a hand, calm as ever. She stepped onto the mat and faced Darren, no hesitation. Darren squinted, then laughed out loud. Oh, brave. But so that you know, we don't offer a fight the parent lesson here. Still, let's call this entertainment for the kids. A few nervous chuckles scattered through the room, but no one stopped it. We have a rule, right? No full contact counters? Amira asked. Her eyes locked on his. Yes. I'll go easy on you, Darren smirked. No, I'm asking so you remember. Because if I counter, no one can claim I broke the rules first. Darren froze for half a second. That voice wasn't the voice of a mother anymore. It was the voice of a warrior, one long acquainted with blood-stained rings. Jaden took a step back, face pale. A white boy beside him whispered, Your mom's crazy or something. Jaden didn't even turn around. No, You don't know who my mom is." Darren stepped forward. The mat felt smaller now, every eye in the room locked on the two figures standing opposite. "Begin!" he shouted, then lunged forward with a spinning kick, his go-to move for intimidating new students. Amira didn't flinch. As his leg neared, she leaned, just enough for the kick to slice past like a breeze. Darren stumbled. He turned, unleashed a flurry, 3 elbows, 2 roundhouse kicks. But Amira didn't strike back. She dodged light, precise, as if reading every move before it came. To the untrained eye, it looked like luck. But to anyone who'd ever stepped into a real ring, that was skill, sharpened by blood, honed by pain. Sweat began to bead on Darren's forehead. He couldn't touch her. And when he let out a frustrated growl and charged like a wounded animal, Amira finally spoke. "The world's small. You still haven't changed your kicking style since 2010. Darren Simmons. He froze mid-attack. "You know me." She smiled. "You lost to me in an East Coast MMA qualifier. But back then, I was still using my real name. Amira Cole." The entire dojo fell silent. Jaden's eyes widened. The kids who used to mock him now whispered among themselves. One parent pulled out their phone and searched. And then the headlines lit up the screen. Black Phoenix, 3-time black female MMA champion, disappeared after family tragedy. A quiet shock rippled across the room. Amira tightened the belt at her waist. She looked straight at Darren. Now, with his head lowered, lips pressed tightly shut. She spoke clearly. Every word is cut with clarity. "I'm not here to fight. I'm here to reclaim respect for my son and every child overlooked because of their skin color." She turned to the parents. "How many of you have watched your child be dismissed for not fitting the image of martial arts? How many of you stayed silent when you saw injustice?" No one answered. But their eyes had begun to change. The air in the dojo froze after Amira's final words. Darren, once king of the mat, now looked pale as thin foam about to dissolve. Parents murmured, but no one spoke out loud. Some began searching on their phones. And when the name Amira Cole, Black Phoenix, surfaced alongside old fight videos, a storm of quiet realization swept through the room. Jaden stood frozen. He couldn't believe it. His mom, the quiet, timid woman he thought he knew, it was the legend he had watched in awe on YouTube without ever realizing it. "Mom, you're Black Phoenix," he whispered so softly only he could hear it. Across the mat, Darren took a step back, flustered. Then, trying to salvage his pride, he forced a smirk. "I don't care who you are. This isn't an MMA arena. It's a dojo for children, and I don't think you're qualified to speak like that." Amira stepped forward, stood firm, eyes never leaving his. "I don't need a qualification, Darren. I only need the truth. And the truth is my son and many other kids here are being mistreated. Not because of skill, but because of skin." Several students of color glanced at one another. Some lowered their heads. Others had a fire in their eyes for the first time. "And if you think I'm not qualified to speak," Amira said slowly, each word a blow to Darren's ego, "then let's settle it with a match." The room held its breath. "What do you want?" Darren growled. "A public sparring match, tomorrow, right here, in front of every parent and student. If I lose, I'll leave. You can go back to being Master Darren like no one ever challenged you. But if I win," she paused, looked him straight in the eye, "you will apologize, publicly, and promise that this dojo will never again practice discrimination of any kind." A white parent scoffed under his breath. "This is ridiculous. It's a kids' class, not a political arena." But immediately, from the back row, a parent of color stood up. the mother of Malik, the boy who was once disqualified from the green belt test. Her voice was calm, firm. I agree. It's time someone stood up. We've been silent long enough. Darren sneered. I'm not scared. A friendly match. Fine, but I won't go easy. Amira replied, I don't need you to go easy. I need you to fight for real. So these students understand martial arts isn't a tool to humiliate. It's a tool to defend justice. Jaden stepped forward, voice trembling. Mom, are you sure Amira placed a hand on his shoulder? You once asked why I left the ring, didn't you? It was because I wanted you to have a peaceful childhood. But if my silence has caused you the pain I once endured. She lifted her chin, her voice rising for all to hear. Then it's time I return, not to win, but to reclaim fairness. The setting sun poured golden light through the tall glass windows, spilling across the green mat, and in that moment, Amira's shadow stretched long across the floor, standing like a warrior reborn from memory. A student whispered, She used to be an MMA champion. Malik looked up and said quietly, No, she's what we need, someone who dares to speak the truth. The match was set. Tomorrow, 5:00 p.m., in the very dojo where silence had once been law. That evening, the small apartment shared by mother and son was tranquil. No TV, no music, only the ticking of the clock against the white wall and the soft yellow light spilling from the kitchen into the living room. Jaden sat on the couch, still in his martial arts uniform, gripping his old headband tightly between both hands. His eyes never left his mother, the woman who stood silently by the window, motionless like a statue. Amira said nothing. She quietly opened a low drawer, pulling out a small box covered in dust. From inside, she carefully retrieved an object wrapped in a worn, faded black cloth, handling it like a fragment of memory she had long tried to forget. She placed it gently on the table, unwrapped the cloth. An MMA championship belt. Old, scratched. But the metallic shine still revealed the etched words, Black Phoenix. Champion 2011, 2012, 2013. Jaden choked up. Mom, why didn't you ever tell me about this? Amira didn't turn around. She stared at the belt, her fingers brushing the scars, as if tracing wounds that still lived in her mind. Because I didn't want you to grow up thinking that strength is the only way to earn respect. Jaden stood up, strolled to her side. I used to think you were weak, because you were always silent, always avoiding conflict. I was wrong. Amira turned to her son. Her eyes had softened, but behind them still lingered years of pain unspoken and unhealed. Jaden, some wounds don't leave scars you can see. Some pain doesn't come from punches. It comes from looks, from the silence of people who should have spoken up. She paused. Her voice grew heavier. I didn't leave the ring because I lost to anyone. I left after my final victory when I stepped down from the mat and heard my coach say to the press, It's kind of surprising, someone like her being that good. You know who someone like her is? She turned to Jaden quietly. A black woman. Jaden clenched his fists. His eyes turned red not from anger, but because for the first time he understood the burden his mother had carried all those years. You went through all of that, so that I could grow up in peace. Amira gave a slight nod. But now I realize, if that peace means letting you suffer silently, then it's not peace at all. The room fell quiet again. Only the soft light from the kitchen flickered across the championship belt, like an old symbol being called back to life. Mom, Jaden finally said, his voice trembling. You don't have to win tomorrow for me to be proud. I was proud. The moment you stepped onto that mat today. Amira turned to him, her eyes blurred with tears. She said nothing, just opened her arms and embraced her son. It wasn't an intense or dramatic hug. It was a hug of sorrow, forgiveness, and connection. That night before bed, Jaden placed a photo of him and his mum taken the day he earned his first yellow belt into a new frame. Beneath it, he wrote a simple line, "Son of Black Phoenix." In the darkness, Amira sat alone at the kitchen table. She opened an old notebook, one where she used to write down fighting techniques, and scribbled a few new lines. "Tomorrow, I'm not fighting to win. I fight so no child of color will ever bow their head, believing they are less than standard. I fight so my son understands. We were not born to ask permission to be respected." The match hadn't happened yet, but its meaning had already begun to spread. The next afternoon, Master Lin's dojo was packed. Parents who usually dropped off their kids in a rush now lingered lining the walls. Some whispered, some filmed with their phones. The atmosphere felt less like a class, more like an official tournament. In the center of the mat stood Darren Crisp uniform, bold black belt face, cold and proud as ever. But this time, there was something uncertain in his eyes. Opposite him stood Amira. No uniform, no title belt. Just faded sweatpants, a plain t-shirt, and her curls tied back at the neck. But her calm presence silenced the entire room. No one knew who she was better than she did. And today, she didn't need to explain. Jaden sat close to the edge of the mat, eyes locked on every step his mother took. Other boys of color, Malik Ezra Jalil, watched silently too. To them, this wasn't a match. It was a public reckoning, for a system that had made them feel less than. Darren stepped forward, projecting his voice like a teacher. "This is just a friendly demonstration. I won't go full force to avoid injuries. I hope everyone understands." His eyes swept across the crowd of white parents. Some nodded in agreement, but no one noticed the arrogance in every word. Amira didn't respond. She bowed with formal respect. No speech, just presence. The match began. Darren immediately moved into attack. Roundhouse kicks, knee strikes, perfectly choreographed techniques, all landing just centimeters from Amira. The dojo applauded. Some students cheered, but Amira did not move. She sidestepped, lightly, tilted her head, took exactly one step back, dodging every strike with flawless precision. No counter, not a single punch, not even a furrowed brow. Darren's expression started to shift. His moves lost their elegance. They grew hurried, tainted with frustration. "Stop dodging," he growled. "This is a match, not a dance." He attacked harder. His fists and feet now burned with anger. But still, Amira only leaned, pivoted, and turned her shoulders, avoiding everything. No one in the room laughed anymore. No more applause. A woman whispered, "She's controlling the fight, without striking." A white father nodded slowly. "She's not refusing to hit. She's teaching a lesson." Darren shouted, "You scared of me or just too unskilled to fight back?" Amira finally spoke. Her voice was soft, but it echoed across the entire dojo. "I don't need violence to make you learn this lesson." Darren snapped. He spun, launching his signature spinning kick A move that had dazzled and dropped students for years. But at the very moment his leg lifted into the air, Amira leaned gently, and with one hand he touched the pivot point of his torso. Just one touch, and Darren lost his balance. He slipped, crashed hard onto the mat, in full view of the entire dojo. The room held its breath. No one could believe their eyes. A woman, without striking, without tension, had brought a white, black belt instructor to the floor with nothing more than one precise step. Jaden jumped to his feet. Malik gasped. "She's real. She's Black Phoenix." The room shifted. Eyes once full of doubt turned to awe. The cruel laughter from days before dissolved into silence. And Darren. He lay there, drenched in sweat, eyes fixed on the ceiling, not understanding what had just happened. Amira bent down, extended a hand. Her voice was calm. "Don't let one fall. Break your pride, Darren. But if you still believe skin color makes us weak, then that fall wasn't hard enough." Darren sat up in the middle of the mat, gasping for breath, his face stunned. The fall hadn't drawn blood, but it had shattered the pride he had spent years building. The entire dojo was silent. No laughter, no applause. Only dozens of eyes fixed on the woman who had taken one step back, bowed her head, without raising her voice, without gloating. Amira stepped closer to him. Her voice was low, but it rang like a bronze bell in everyone's mind. "I don't need to defeat you to prove I'm strong. I need you and everyone here to understand one thing. No one is born to be looked down on because of the color of their skin, or the way they look." A wave of whispers rippled through the rows of parents. A few bowed their heads. Some of the children of color held each other's hands more tightly. Jaden stood right by the edge of the mat, eyes shining with pride. Darren struggled to his feet. His face burned red with shame, his voice trembling. "Who are you? Who are you, really?" Amira didn't answer right away. She turned and walked toward her son. She gently placed a hand on Jaden's shoulder, then turned back to the center of the room. "I'm a mother. But before that, I was Black Phoenix, 3-time MMA champion. I gave up glory because I wanted my child to have a childhood free of judgment. But I was wrong. Silence doesn't erase injustice. Only action and truth can do that." Murmurs spread across the room. Some parents searched online. Old photos began appearing on phone screens. A black woman, eyes cold as steel, raising a golden championship belt. It was her. It was Amira Cole. And then applause broke out. First from a child, Malik, then from Marissa, a brown-skinned mother Darren had once ignored during a parent meeting. Soon the entire room rose to their feet. They weren't clapping for victory. They were clapping for truth, for courage, and for the woman who dared to stand when the entire system had stayed silent. Darren stood frozen, a man locked in place amid a sea of people. Finally, he lowered his head and mumbled, "I was wrong. I didn't realize how many people I had hurt." Amira stepped closer. She didn't gloat. She didn't posture. She said softly, "Now you do. And that is what matters most. To recognize your wrongs and dare to change that too is a form of strength." She turned to the students, especially the children of color, and raised her voice slightly. "If any of you have ever felt looked down on, then remember this moment, not to hold hate, but to understand your true worth doesn't lie in what others say. It lies in how you stand up to injustice." Jaden ran to his mother. Choking back tears, he whispered between waves of applause, "You're not a legend of the ring, Mom. You're a legend in my heart." In the weeks that followed, Master Lin's dojo was no longer the same, not because of new signs or a fresh coat of paint, but because something deeper had changed, the spirit within each training session. Coach Darren, the man who used to walk past students of color as if they were invisible, now arrived first left, last. He quietly adjusted the way he taught, in every look, every word. In one class, when Malik failed a sidekick 3 times in a row, Darren didn't shout. He lowered his voice, stepped closer. "You can do it. Not because your skin is different, but because I see the strength in your legs. Try again, and believe in yourself." Malik's eyes widened, unsure of what had just happened, but his eyes grew brighter. Darren began personally apologizing to former students he had once mistreated. He acknowledged his mistakes in front of the parents, those he had previously dismissed. He abolished the unspoken rules that had once fast-tracked white students to higher belts, And most importantly, he invited Amira Cole, the woman who had brought his ego to its knees, to become the dojo's featured monthly speaker. The first day, Amira stepped onto the small wooden platform in the community room. The room was packed with students and parents. She wore no black belt, no champion's robe, just ordinary clothes, and a voice warm, slow, and deep like an underground spring. "The ring will teach you physical strength," she said, "but only the heart will teach you what is right. And if you don't know when to stand up, then every technique you've learned is meaningless." A white girl in the front row raised her hand gently. "Miss, were you scared when you had to speak the truth in front of everyone?" Amira smiled. Her eyes drifted to Jaden, who gave a silent, steady nod. "Of course I was scared," she replied. "But if you stay silent when you see injustice one day, you'll be more afraid of yourself than anyone else." Her talks began to spread. Nearby schools invited her in. Parent groups formed coalitions across other dojos, launching the city's first forum on martial arts and racial justice. And right inside Master Lin's dojo, the same place that once stayed silent while a student of color was shamed, now hung a chalkboard quote from Amira written boldly at the center of the room. "The fist does not measure strength, but by how you lift others, even those who once looked down on you." The sun had just dipped below the horizon. Amira and Jaden walked side by side, leaving the dojo behind. The same place that only a month ago had made the boy feel invisible and forced his mother to live in hiding. Now the air felt gentler. No more judgmental stares. Only the soft rustle of wind beneath the eaves. And Jaden's hand was wrapped tightly in his mother's. He looked up at her, his voice young and sincere. "Mom, if you hadn't hidden the fact you were a champion, would I still have been bullied?" Amira stopped. She knelt and looked into his big black eyes, the same eyes she'd seen brimming with tears whenever he was hurt by prejudice. She held him close, whispering, as if speaking to herself, "I used to think protecting you meant hiding my past. But I forgot. It's not the truth that hurts us. It's the fear of it that does." Jaden pressed his face into her shoulder. A moment later he smiled, a breeze-light smile. "So that means you won't hide anything anymore, right?" Amira nodded, her gaze drifting toward the fading lights of the dojo behind them. "From now on, I will never stay silent again. Not just for you, but for every child who's ever been told they weren't good enough, just because of the color of their skin or the sound of their voice." The following week, Master Lin's dojo held a special event, a Day of Courage, a ceremony where students were invited to share the moments that had hurt them and the people who helped them rise above. Jaden was asked to speak. He didn't need notes. He wasn't nervous. He raised his head and spoke with clear, steady confidence. "I used to be afraid that people wouldn't like me because I didn't look like them. But my mom, she showed me that I don't need to be like anyone else. I need to remember who I am." The room erupted in applause. Amira stood in the back row, her eyes glistening red, her hand pressed to her chest, not to carry the weight anymore, but to hold the fire that now burned with belief. After the ceremony, someone messaged the dojo, "I used to think martial arts was about training the body. Now I see. It's about shaping the soul." That night in their little living room, Amira and Jaden sat together reading a freshly published article. The black woman who was once a legend in the ring has now become a symbol of courage and justice in the very place that once silenced her. Jaden smiled, his eyes shimmering. "They're calling you a legend, Mum. But to me, you always were." Amira ruffled his hair, her eyes aglow in the warm yellow light. "And you're the reason. I found my way back to who I am." As mother and son stepped onto their porch that night, looking up into the sky, Amira whispered, not to anyone in particular, but as if sending a message into the air to the dreams of millions who had once been forgotten. No one should have to live in the shadows, just because others are afraid of their light.